Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Europe, and here is Denmark. Now let's zip our way through its history, shall we? Long ago, back when woolly mammoths wandered through the receding Ice Age wilderness of the north, the first inhabitants stepped into what would one day be Denmark. Denmark consists of the Jutland Peninsula, called Jylland in Danish, and over 1,000 islands, including this big one called Sjælland, or Zealand in English, not to be confused with Zeeland in the Netherlands, which New Zealand is named after, even though it's spelled like the Danish, not Dutch name, and yes, I suppose it is to be confused. Anyway, the first folks fixing themselves in Danish climes were hunters, who eventually began to farm the soil and set up the rudiments of a civilization. For 1,000 years, northern Denmark was part of the pitted ware culture, living in huts along the coast and hunting seal and boar. By the time the Bronze Age barges in, we see the people of Denmark have increased in technical cleverness, casting helmets like this and swords like that. It was during the Iron Age that the Germanic tribe known as the Danes began migrating into what would become their homeland, supplanting the also Germanic Jutes, who preferred immigrating to Britain. The Celts to the south taught the Danes how to smelt and smith iron, which the Danes extracted from bogs and swamps. Speaking of which, this is the face of an Iron Age Dane, who was buried in peatland bog over 2,000 years ago, which naturally mummified him. He was likely sacrificed by hanging, and a braided noose of animal skin was still tight round his neck when he was found in 1950. The Danes, like other Scandinavians, began using the writing system known as runes around 200 AD, those angular characters etched into objects and stones for telling tales and casting spells. This Danish comb has some of the oldest ever runic inscriptions engraved on it. The 8th century sees us in the Viking Age. Viking society consisted of 3 classes: the thralls, slaves consigned to house chores and farm work, who could be sacrificed when their owner died; the carls, free peasants, builders, farmers; and finally the jarls, the aristocracy who administered the state, owned more land and bigger, or I should say, longer houses. Viking women had a lot more societal rights and freedoms than most contemporary cultures granted, but what Vikings are especially famous for is their pillaging raids and military conquests beginning in the late 700s. Why they started doing this is not certain, but what is certain is that Viking naval capabilities were second to none. They were expert sailors and shipbuilders, which was bad news for much of Europe, as the Vikings were also ferocious warriors, whose pagan beliefs lauded death in battle. Danes began attacking England in 835, steadily bringing in settlers to live there, and seized Normandy and France, founding a colony under the leader Rollo. Denmark was strengthened, and it subjugated Norway under King Harald Bluetooth, who paved the way for his country's Christianization after he converted. Now the English were getting pretty sick of Danish attacks, and in 1002, King Ethelred the Unready decided to kill all the Danes living in England. The massacre may have provoked Bluetooth's son, Sven Forkbeard, to invade some more, which he did several times until he conquered England in 1013. This conquest was reasserted by his son Knud, who proved a very apt and able king of his Anglo-Danish realm. Naturally, his domain did not long survive him, but increasingly Christian Denmark was changing, slowly learning that slavery was wrong, and that practice dwindled and died out. The Middle Ages was a tough time. You had to be strong, like Valdemar, who had his warriors fighting over in Estonia as part of a crusade against the pagans there. According to legend, during the Battle of Lindaniza, the Estonians were winning when the Danish archbishop raised his hands and prayed, and a red flag with a white cross tumbled from the heavens and emboldened the Danes, who won the battle. The miraculous banner became Denmark's national flag, the Dannebrog, the world's oldest continuously used flag. Now, if Denmark ever needed some spare cash, it would sell off some of its territories, which worked for a while, but went a bit far under Christopher II, so as to almost mortgage Denmark off the map. But fortunately, his son proved a stronger king, and taxed and conquered his debts away. Then the Black Death cast its ghostly glare over the land, and perhaps as many as 60% of Danes died of it. Margareta proved to be an intelligent, judicious queen, promoting peace, and determined to have Scandinavia as a united entity, which she achieved with the Kalmar Union. This union lasted over a century, but Sweden restlessly attempted to wriggle out of it, succeeding at last in 1523. Meanwhile, Denmark sided with Luther over Rome and became Protestant under Christian III. Christian IV was a very active and energetic monarch, full of courage and fond of drink. He oversaw his nation's further enrichment, and while he squandered a lot of wealth in warring against Sweden and others, the people loved him and he remained popular. His successor, Frederick III, declared war on Sweden again and got thrashed, with the country almost totally conquered, though the capital Copenhagen, or Copenhagen in Danish, held out and bravely resisted, and the Dutch sent help and Sweden went home. Frederick instituted absolute monarchy, giving the crown immense power. Anyway, life for the peasants continued continued to be dreary, while their dainty king enjoyed operas in Venice. His grandson was even more hedonistic. In 1788, the good chief minister Baunsdorf abolished serfdom. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain feared Denmark might supply Napoleon with its fleet, and bombarded Copenhagen to ensure this didn't happen. British occupation of Danish waters proved ruinous to Denmark's economy, and in 1814, Denmark lost Norway to Sweden. King Frederick VII signed away the absolutism of royal power in 1849, and Denmark thus entered modernity. Industrialization was readily embraced, and soon railways were lacerating the landscape. The country passed various reforms and remained neutral in World War I. The Great Depression made everyone miserable until the economy picked up steam in the late 1930s. In 1940, the Nazis invaded and took over, and the Danes were not very happy about it. After the war, Denmark became a founding member of NATO and joined the EEC, which would become the EU, all amid economic adversity. But the standard of living shot way up, alongside industrial production and, admittedly, taxes that subsidized its famous welfare system. Denmark today is a rich, happy country, ranked very high in the Human Development Index, listed as the least corrupt country in the world, and, while small, if you include its territory of Greenland, it is actually enormous. So that's Denmark, the land of Lego and the Little Mermaid, a land of great writers, great scientists, great filmmakers, and if you like food, one of the best restaurants in the world is in Denmark, where you can eat whatever this is. Millions of people visit every year, and thanks for visiting me in this video. Until next time, bye-bye!